My guest today is Brita Boer, an alum from the class of 1990. She currently works at Charles River Laboratories as a senior human resources and business partner, and she has over 10 years' experience in the human resources field. And I am super excited today to talk to her about myths and tips when it comes to salary negotiation. So, Brita, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Richard. I'm really excited to be here. This is one of my favorite topics.
That's incredible. And so, for a little bit of background for the listener, how this idea came about is, as you all know, I work as a career coach, and recently, in a meeting with some of the other career coaches, we realized that we've been having a lot of conversations in and around salary negotiation. And this is something that's super important to talk about, especially in this current landscape of work with hybrid work and flexible schedules and things like that. There are so many more things than ever to negotiate for. And so the idea came up that we would actually do this podcast and, kind of put it together so that it exists and everybody can go back and listen to it. So today I'm going to be talking to Brita, and we are going to go through some different myths and tips that I found on the internet about salary negotiation. And she's going to tell me whether they're true or false, and then we're going to have a quick conversation about them. And so to get us started, I will throw an easy one out there. So, true or false? People should be negotiating about 100% of their job offers.
I would say that is true. There is no penalty for negotiating a job offer. They can't pull your offer back just because you say, hey, thank you very much for the offer. I'm going to take a day or two to think about this, and then I'll get back to you. So don't think that there's ever any penalty for negotiating your job offer.
Awesome. The next question is true or false? If the first initial offer you get is pretty good, you should not negotiate.
So I'm going to say false to that. I think and I think we can get into this as well a little bit later, but there's more things to look at beyond just the salary, right? So you always want to you never want to just accept an offer right away. You want to take the offer, you want to think about it. You might want to do some research on perhaps the pay. Maybe other people who work in the organization. Maybe you want to check with them and ask them, like, hey, when you started, did you negotiate? Are there any things that you feel like they're flexible on?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, because I think especially early on in your career, a lot of students, when they don't think about, or when they think that they don't have a lot of leverage, if an offer comes in that they think is a little bit higher than they thought, and it's like, okay, it's your first job and you're getting offered more money than you ever thought, it's just like, yes, I'm going to take it. It's just like, or, if they're willing to give you that much, who knows what else they might be also willing to give you. And so entering into negotiation, you might actually be able to get a little bit more.
Yeah. And that's a good point, Richard. It's also like you want to look at your entire package at that point, because they might be paying you a higher rate, but maybe you have a little bit less vacation time than what you expected. Or, perhaps you want to look at the benefit package. They could be offering you more money because they're compensating for it somewhere else. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I think that actually leads us perfectly into the next question. And so, true or false, it's better to think of it as as compensation negotiation versus salary negotiation, because there are more things to consider than just your salary.
Yes, that's very, very true. I think some of the key things that you want to be looking at is how much vacation time are they offering? Vacation is a really easy thing to negotiate to add another week. Especially if they're only offering 2 weeks and you want 3, or they're offering 3 weeks, you want 4. An extra week of vacation is, I would say, a pretty common thing that people will negotiate on. I think in this day and age as well, with so many work from home opportunities, whereas, people are going back on site in different industries and different, roles. I think working from home or having the option to work from home 1 or 2 days a week is something you can negotiate as well. Bonuses is a negotiation. A lot of companies will offer you, say, okay, here's your salary, but then based on the performance of the company and based on your work performance, you're eligible for, 5% bonus, 10% bonus. That's a good question if you're not familiar with that to ask, hey, what does that mean? What is this based on? And if the company's performance, doesn't hit expectations, what does that look like? And maybe even ask how has the company done over the last 5 years? What have bonuses been over the last 5 years? I know in a position of being a recruiter previously, that was a common question we would get is I would say, yeah, we bonus twice a year. And people would say, well, are you actually hitting your bonuses? Because sometimes a company's not hitting their bonus. And so you're not really getting anything for that.
Absolutely.
Um, so that's something to keep in mind. Relocation expenses, don't ever hesitate to ask for that for relocation assistance, especially if you're moving, a significant distance to take a job. Most companies will be happy to help out and have programs for that. Let's see. A new thing that I have come across is commuting and parking expenses. That, like, if you're going into a big city where you're going to have, incur additional expenses due to the commute or, expensive parking, there are companies who part of their benefit package is to cover that for you. So that's something to ask about if you think that that's going to be an issue. If you're working at a company where you're driving 15 minutes away, you don't have to pay to park, then that's not a benefit that you're going to probably ask for. And then another thing is like a lot of companies will pay for your cell phone coverage or pay a portion of your cell phone coverage. If you're required to answer phone calls, when you're not in or at work or maybe like at your workstation, and your workstation could be your desk at home in front of a computer. But if you're required to take calls outside of that, oftentimes they'll pay a percentage, if not all of your cell phone bill as well. Okay. Yeah, I just think there's a lot of, I think to ask people, ask your parents, ask your friends, hey, what kind of benefits do you get? What types of things does your company cover? And that'll help you out as well.
Yeah, I think to me, especially in, like I said, in the current climate that we're in, I think it really is changing a lot of things and giving, especially new employees and entry level employees, a lot
Mhm.
more leverage than they've had previously. If a company is asking and saying that, like, we are actually mandating that everybody physically be in this building, then, like, what? Typically, something that relocation expenses sometimes has been a challenge to negotiate for entry level employees. Like, hey, that's back on the table now. And I
Mhm.
think one of the things that students should always just understand is it's like the worst thing they could say is no. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't really hurt to ask. I think, as you said at the top, it's just like if you ask for it and they say no, like, they're not going to pull the offer, not after they've invested so much time into the process already. And so, like, you don't want to ask things that are wildly outlandish, but, like,
Mhm.
if you can ask and make a good reason for why it would make sense, like, yeah, that's why it's
Mhm.
called a negotiation.
Yes. Yep. I agree.
All right. So, next question, I think it's actually going to be really interesting. True or false? It's better to negotiate in person rather than or versus through email.
So I'm going to say this is false. I think a lot of times that initial offer is going to come to you over the phone, whether you're working with a recruiter. Sometimes your future boss will be the one calling and making the initial offer. Sometimes it's just somebody in HR. But typically it's going to come over the phone. And you don't have to say yes or no at that point. At that point, I usually tell people to say, thank you very much. I'm super excited that, that you think I'm a good match for your organization. I look forward to receiving the offer in writing. Let me take a look at it, and then I'll get back to you in the next day or two. I think what that does is it buys you a little bit of time. It allows you to do some research if you feel the need to do so. Um, but then it's also I think we want to reply to them by email, especially when you have it in writing. You want to put back in writing what it is that you're going to ask for in addition to what they're offering. It also gives you the opportunity to articulate why you're asking for these things or why it might make sense. Um, this is not a Santa Claus Christmas list. This isn't like you just start putting a bunch of things in to see if you can get it. You want to be thoughtful about are these things that are important to you? Are these things that you need? Are these things that make sense for the role that you're going into? Um, so I think when you reply in writing, then they have that. Oftentimes, you're probably going to get this from either a recruiter or an HR person. It also allows that HR person to forward it to the hiring manager and ask them, hey, do we have some wiggle room here? Um, yeah, there's also other things you can do if you have been talking to the hiring manager or communicating with the hiring manager. Sometimes I think it's a good idea to, when you send that email back to the HR recruiter, that you include them on it as well, so that they know that you're asking for a little bit more. If you have questions or follow-up questions, don't hesitate to call the HR or the hiring manager, the person that you would actually be working for. I think that's something that a lot of times people are afraid to do, but this is the person who has gone and said, I want to hire Richard,
Yeah.
right? And so they're excited. They want you to come work for them. And so if you have questions about your offer, or if you have questions about, hey, I'm going to reply back, but I'm just wondering, is there cell phone coverage? Because sometimes things might not be included and it might be a mistake. Like,
Sure.
I can't tell you the number of times that I've dealt with offers that have gone to people that there's mistakes in the offer. And I can't emphasize enough, like, this offer letter that you are going to sign and they're going to sign is like, this is a golden ticket as you walk into an organization. For example, I had a recruiter put an extra week into an offer letter that wasn't supposed to be there, and we had to honor it because both parties had signed it.
Yep.
And so also, don't get an offer and don't ever be offended by anything. It could be that there's just a mistake that was made. If they told you they're going to give you something, it's not in your offer letter, don't hesitate to push back and say, hey, I recall we talked about this. I don't see it in my offer letter. Could we revise this? Because what you sign is what you're agreeing to.
Absolutely. I think, to me, one of the key things is that, to kind of build upon the point that you're making, and I think to help students understand, is that, like, the reason why you want to negotiate through email is because if you think about it, throughout your career, you're probably going to have, at absolute most, and that's extreme high end, 10 to 15 jobs, probably more realistically 6 to 7. So that means throughout your entire 40 years of working, you're going to go negotiate 6 to 7 offers, and you're going up against somebody who literally all they do is negotiate offers all the time. They're probably going to offer, negotiate 6 to 7 offers potentially over the next 90 days. And so it's just you are incredibly disadvantaged to do it when you're in person versus over email, where you can take time to think about what you want to say, to do research. And I would recommend that potentially going and talking to one of the career coaches of the CCPD, because we could help you find resources that sometimes help support your research. One of them that I like to use is, you can Google it. It's called NerdWallet's Cost of Living Calculator. And what it allows you to do is you can put in a salary in 2 different locations. It'll say, so for example, if you put in $50,000 in Kalamazoo and then put in San Francisco, it'll say hey, 50,000 in Kalamazoo is actually 117 in San Francisco. And so that doesn't mean you're going to get 117, but you can use that to go back and say hey guys, rent is way higher here. I can't accept a $50,000 offer, And I think those things, as you can think about it, you can provide research, and again, reaffirming that hey, through every step of the way, saying, I'm super excited to accept this job. I'm really looking forward to be here. And one of the things that, a piece of advice I heard in different podcasts that I thought was really useful is that, there are some magic words I found. It says, when you are initially responding to them and saying that, can I have some time to consider it, signing off the email by saying, I'm sure we can come to an agreement that works for both of us. Because at that point you're acknowledging that, hey, I do plan on negotiating some part of this, but also it's important to me to accept and have an offer that we both are comfortable with. Because if you as an employee sign an offer that you hate, you're not going to be super excited to work there, feeling that you got to take advantage of, and vice versa. If the company starts you hired you, they feel like, you know what, they really took advantage of us and they got way more than we were expecting to give. You're starting a contentious relationship versus you guys both come up with the offer you both agree to and you both feel really good about it. And then as Britta said, make sure that at the very end of it, whatever you guys verbally agree to and they give it to you, you read it and make sure it's all accurate, because once you sign it, you've basically locked yourself in. And most jobs typically don't actually do renegotiation the way that like sports does. And so typically, like, once you sign it, unless you get a different role and then you actually have to renegotiate and then potentially sign a different contract, you're just kind of locked in at that point.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
All right. Next question. True or false? Entry-level job seekers have no bargaining power.
That is false, and it's very false in this day and age. I would say entry level, whether it's because you're just coming out of college or anything. Even I would even say if you're still in school and you're looking for a part-time job, entry level is negotiable. People are struggling to find help right now, and you can ask for just a little. Ask for just a little bit more, and my guess is you're probably going to get it because people need the help. And as they are making offers to people, they are considering, like, we really need to move forward here. So yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're entry level. I would even advise if you're looking for a part-time waitressing or, hosting or anything like that, I would still attempt to negotiate that initial offer.
Yeah, totally. And I think to kind of build upon that point, one thing that I'm sure you will agree with, as personally somebody who's been on the other side of the table and have participated in a lot of hiring, the thing that students and listeners are going to understand as they get further into the career and they're also on the other side of the table is that it's really time consuming and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And so part of what gives you leverage is the fact that like companies don't want to start over after they've been maybe through 30 or maybe even 60 days of a search and multiple rounds of interviews and all that stuff. And then to have it walk away and say like, hey, we're going to potentially pull people from different departments who this isn't part of your regular duties and ask them to do it all over again. Yeah, they don't want to do that. And that's actually what gives you a lot of your leverage. Even when you feel like you're entry level, you don't have a lot of skills. It's just like, you don't want to start over. Guess what? They don't either. And so that's a great way for you to say like, hey, I really want us to work together. Let's find a deal that works for both of us.
Yeah, and I also think along those same lines, like, don't underestimate likability. The person who's hiring you, if they like you and you have good rapport and they want you to work for them, I play likability all the time because people don't want to work with or have somebody working for them that they don't care for.
Yep.
And so if you feel like you're having some really great high energy conversations with somebody, that's very much something that's going to work to your advantage as well.
Yeah, I think to me that's such a great point that you brought up, because I think one of the things that I've personally learned as I've gone further in my career, and I do tell the students that I work to, is that like once you actually graduate and you're in your full-time career and you're not seeing your friends as much, the people who you work with, you spend so much time together that likability matters so much. And a lot of times, a person who is 10 out of 10 likability and 7 or 8 out of 10 skills wise, like, you will absolutely take that over a person who's like 10 out of 10 skilled, but like 4 or 5 out of 5 likability. Because like, dude, I don't want to work next to a jerk for 40 hours a week. I just don't.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so the next question, true or false? Companies expect you to negotiate.
I'm going to say it's mostly true. I think companies, I'm hesitant to say true because I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, they're lowballing me because they expect me to negotiate. I don't necessarily think that that's the case anymore. That hasn't been the case where I've worked. Quite honestly, because there's so much focus on fair and equitable pay, that companies, I think, are more doing their due diligence more in this day and age about what are the salary ranges for the roles, what is the starting rate, what is the starting range, what is the max range, all that compensation work is being done in organizations more so than what it's been done in the past. And so I think you don't necessarily have companies who are quote unquote lowballing offers anymore, expecting people to negotiate. But I will say, from the standpoint of um, if you do negotiate, companies are not, it's not a surprise, it's not a shock that, yes, from that aspect, they do expect that people are probably going to negotiate.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, Here's a good question. True or false? You can't negotiate without another offer already in hand.
Okay, so that is false. You don't need to have another offer in hand. But what I will advise is, please don't ever lie and say you have another offer in hand, because I just think that that's an integrity issue. And should somehow they ever find out that you lied about it, that's not going to reflect very well on you. I actually had somebody that I worked with in my previous job that did that, went, in a role, but went and was ready for a promotion, wasn't getting it. So she went to uh, her boss and basically lied and said she had another offer. And so they gave her a promotion. And I never thought the same about that person ever again. I, that was it's a true integrity issue to me. So don't ever lie and say you have another offer. You don't need to have another offer. You can negotiate, offer or not. And I would even say, like, sometimes that's something people will do is they'll be in their current job and they'll think, oh, I want to move up. I need to get their attention. So I'm going to go interview, get an offer, and come back. I think it's just better to go to your manager and just have a candid conversation. Tell them what you're looking for. Tell them what kind of development you're looking for. Tell them where you want to be in 5 years. And then either they are going to support you and try to help you get there. And if they're not, then I'm going to say, I would question that this is a good place for you to stay.
Yeah, totally. I think to me that's a really interesting point because I think a lot of times, a lot of people don't understand how to potentially signal that you may be looking to move up or to do something else. And
Mhm.
I agree with you. I think it's about having a really good relationship with your direct supervisor
Mhm.
and, approaching it not from a place of um, threatening or you're trying to manipulate, but just say like, hey, you know what? I think I've been here for a long time. And talk about the things that you have done, the skills that you bring to the table, and like where you would like to see yourself going.
Mhm.
And I think that you know a good employer should be able to have that conversation. And like if you're a quality employee and you have been doing really good work, they will probably welcome that conversation. Be say like, you know what, we do want to keep you in the company, and like we're willing to have this conversation and like figure something out.
Mhm.
And if they're not willing to do that, then like you said, like, all right, well, maybe it's time to at that point think about potentially going someplace else. But like you
Mhm.
said, not in the sense of like, oh, I'm going to go get another offer and then come back and now you'll give it to me. Like, no, I maybe I'll just go do something else and it's fine,
Mhm.
because
Yep.
if you guys are no longer excited to have me here, then like maybe I should go to find someplace else where they are excited to have me. So
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm also going to say, Richard, that's a really good point. And also, even if you take a job and you're in that job and you don't really care for that job, don't think you have to leave the company. Maybe again, you need to go talk to your manager, or you need to go talk to HR and say, this really wasn't for me, but what other opportunities are within the organization that I can maybe look at?
yeah, or even like within your role, sometimes there's a
Hmm.
way to like reallocate certain job duties to say
Yep.
like, well, we're not going to completely like 100% change all of your role, but like maybe it's going to be 70% the same, but like 30% is like something new that you're really excited about and you get to work on that.
Hmm.
And maybe that's
Yep.
good enough. So,
Cool.
all right, let's see here. The next question. True or false? If you negotiate, you'll be perceived as greedy, pushy, or start off on a bad foot.
That is definitely false. I would say, again, a lot of organizations expect that somebody's going to negotiate. They're definitely not surprised when somebody wants to negotiate. I think the only time that potentially you cross over into being pushy is if you keep trying to force a negotiation when they've already said no.
Yeah.
If you get a no, uh, I always say no means no, and that's okay. And then it's really your choice is like, are you happy enough with what they're offering? And is this still something you want to move forward with?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because one of the things that I think about when it comes to interviewing and salary negotiation is that like why are you asking for something? And like you said earlier, like you're not just like making this massive, wish list and like, well, if I get everything here, I'm going to be happy. Like, no, you want to be very thoughtful, and then, but also think about like, what happens if they say no? Like,
Right.
are you prepared to walk away from this?
Mhm.
And to me, I think that depending on the answer, like I may then say like you might want to be thoughtful about like, do you really want to bring that up in negotiation? Because if you know that like, hey, I'm going to ask for this, and if they say no, like it doesn't matter. Like, well, if it doesn't matter, then why are you asking for it? To me, typically, I would
Right.
say like I would recommend probably conserving your energy and really negotiate for the things that really matter to you and are going to make the difference between you accepting an offer or not.
Right. Yep. Good point.
Okay, next question. True or false? You should ask exactly for the salary amount that you want.
I'm going to say false. I think you should ask for a little bit higher than really what you're looking for. Um, it's it's really an interesting dynamic right now. There are some states that are moving towards requiring starting pay ranges to be posted with any position that gets advertised. I think that really dramatically changes the dynamic of all of this.
Sure.
That that you can look and see what it pays. Um, I think you want to ask for a little bit more than really what you're looking, but then know what your bottom line number is, but that's not something you need to share with them. Um, yeah.
So you brought up something interesting, and I'm going to go a little bit off script. And honestly, if it's a bad answer, don't worry, we can actually cut this
Okay.
out because I'm going to cut out this part anyway. But I'm curious because, like, one of the things you mentioned that I do think is really fascinating is that, like, with the way the work is changing, like you said, it's becoming more and more common for job postings to include a salary range.
Hmm.
Uh, do you feel that people should Man, I feel like this is a bad question, but I feel like you're going to get what I mean. Like, do you feel like it's worth it for people to apply for jobs that don't have posted salaries, or should they hold out for the companies that do actually are upfront about that?
Definitely, I don't think it should deter you from applying to other organizations if they don't have posted salaries, um, because I feel like you can ask the question, right? When you're in the interview process, um, something that I hope is becoming less and less of a practice is asking somebody what they currently make.
Yeah,
That is not like that is changing. But I do think when you are in the interview process, it is okay to ask, what is the starting salary range for this role? Um, I think what's more typical in this day and age is you will have a recruiter tell you what the range is and then ask you if you're good with that.
yeah.
Um, and so, and that could be a variety of answers. It can be, yeah, that's good for me, or you could say, okay, good to know, and not commit either way.
Hmm.
um, it's yeah, but most companies in this day and age are willing to share what that starting range is because I mean, from my experience, that's all part of the process on their end before something even gets posted.
Yeah.
Really, that salary range is already predetermined. Now, if you have expertise or you bring something a little bit more, then I think that's where it does make sense to even be able to negotiate outside of that starting range because you're bringing a higher skill set or you're bringing a little bit more to the position than maybe what they're looking for.
Yeah, to me, I think that that's so interesting because I agree with you. Like, in my experience, anytime before even a job goes to get posted, like, oh no, they've already figured out, like, what the salary is going to be for this because they need to know, like, can we even afford to hire somebody for this?
Mhm.
And so to me,
Right.
like when you don't see the position, at least a salary range, it's not always going to be exact amount, but at least a range. Or
Mhm.
a lot of times you'll say in my industry in higher education, a lot of times companies somewhere around their HR website there will be a scale for certain job grades. And
Mhm.
to me, it's just like when that stuff isn't posted, to me, it's curious because like why does it have to be a secret? Y'all know what the number is, and at least at this point, it helps. I think both parties because on your end, it makes sure that like if the number's too low, you're going to get a whole bunch of people out of not apply to it, which saves
Mhm.
you guys a bunch of time or the company a bunch of time because you know what, they don't have to then go screen a bunch of people who are just going to back out.
Right.
So
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, best practice on the company side is like that's part of your initial conversation with them is that they want to share that information with you and they want to find out if that's something that's going to work for you.
I think this actually puts us up for a really good segue into the next question, which is true or false. You must disclose your current salary if asked.
False. And especially if you are, um, yeah, I always say, especially if you're female or if you are in a, minority or protected class, to never share your previous salary because unfortunately, the way things have been in the past, I think, you know, protected classes, they've been not valued.
Yep.
And just because I worked somewhere and maybe made this where I should have been making more, you don't want to disclose that
Mm-hmm.
because again, I always say like, hey, you got to value who you are and you got to value what you're bringing to this organization. And just because maybe as I was working my way up or trying to get some experience, I wasn't valued, but I got that experience. I am now in a place, where it's no, I'm not going to share with you my previous salary because they may or may not have been paying you what you're worth. And the other thing is you don't want the organization that you're applying to say, ooh, maybe we can get a deal here.
Yep.
So don't be anybody's deal. Hold out for what you're worth.
So if a company really presses somebody out that, is it a
Mhm.
matter of just saying, you know what, I don't feel like it's appropriate to disclose that, and I'm uncomfortable with it, and just leaving it there, or is there a better way to handle that?
Yeah, I think I usually advise people to just say when they are asked that question, I if it's like if it's not so sometimes in an application process where you might be online kind of applying for a job, that question comes up. Um, I usually say skip that question. If it's a required field that you have to fill out, I usually put NA in
Yep.
there. Okay. If you are in a verbal conversation with somebody and they ask that question, I just usually turn it around and say, well, why don't you share with me the starting range or the starting salary range for this position? And that typically is enough to trigger to the person asking the question that they shouldn't be asking the question.
That's a great way to handle that. Um, Here we go. Next question. True or false? And I think this is actually a really interesting question. One of the things that you can negotiate for, is for a specific pay raise dependent on an upcoming performance evaluation.
Mm, yes. So that is true. So if you go into that negotiating, process and they come back and say, "Oh, we just really can't do this at this time," it's okay to say, "All right, so what is your performance review process? Do you have annual merits? Or, and at what point in my next year will that occur?" Is one question. You can also say, all right, well, what if I come in and in the next 6 months, we do a performance evaluation? And if I'm, exceeding expectations, would there be opportunity to increase my salary at that time? I think that's a very fair ask and definitely something that if they agree to it, I would have them write it in your offer letter. So you're just going to have them add another bullet point saying, in 6 months, we will, do a performance evaluation, and consider an additional merit at that time.
Yeah, and I think to me, like, that's something that I think is a little bit of a savvy negotiating move, because I think it's something that they wouldn't expect a lot of, especially entry level employees, to think about. And I would just say to listeners, if this is something that you are going to do, one of the things I would also encourage you to do, as Britta said, to like, yes, make sure that's also in your letter, but as much as possible, also you want to get up front. What specifically are you going to be evaluated on?
Mhm.
Because if you leave it up to be a little bit ephemeral, like, as long as I'm exceeding expectations, like, okay, no, what does that actually mean? Like, according to what metrics? Because, like, the clearer you are that you can be up front, that makes sure that it gives you something tangible to work toward, so that when you do end up having that meeting, it's just like you can say like, hey, no, you guys said I needed to reach 50K in sales. I'm at 50K in $2. Like, I
Right.
passed. It may be barely, but I did pass. So.
Exactly. Yep.
And so I think we are actually getting toward the end of our questions. One of the things that I would just like to reiterate is that making sure as you go through the process, you constantly want to be taking notes on everything, even when you're in verbal conversations, and then making sure that whatever we said earlier, you agreed upon, make sure it's actually winds up in the final conversation and in your final contract, and please review it before you sign it. That is probably the most important thing. Do you have any final tips before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. But I very much agree with you. If anybody has any questions, like use the Career Development Center to 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 help you. Don't hesitate to go to the experts and get some help.
Okay, so as we wind up and get ready to wrap up this interview, I want to ask one final quick question. Um, what do you think is the appropriate time to actually respond and to take to consider an offer? Typically, I've always thought that like right around like 3 days is a pretty good number. With like that's 3 business days, with like 5 business days being actually like toward the high end. Is that
Mhm.
too much, or what do you think?
In my opinion, I think that that's a little much, but also understand I've kind of on the other side typically of these things. But I do typically would recommend, take 1 to 2 days and then respond. I think if you tend to wait too long, they start to question your interest.
Sure.
And I think if you can, if you have the time to do the research you want to do and put together what it is you want to negotiate with, um, I think it's better to respond within a day or two versus waiting, because the waiting starts to make them feel a little bit unsure about this relationship and about what your true intentions are. So if this is something that you truly want to, kind of come back with your negotiation and hope to work something out with this company because you're excited to go work for them, try to do that within, I'd say, about 2 to 3 days at the most.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Um, and I will also say is that, just to remind the listeners, is that the CCPD is here to help you with your negotiation. So if you do get an offer and you'd like some follow-up questions about like how to negotiate it, feel free to schedule an appointment. We'd be happy to help you out with that. But that brings us to the end of the show. Britta, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Richard. This is a lot of fun.